Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Olivier Menon. I am the Events Officer at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar introducing SharePoint, which will be presented by Matt Walton, who is Senior IT Consultant at InfoExchange. Just a bit of housekeeping to start with. This session is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you all shortly. You'll then be able to access that recording and the slides at any time on our website. If you have any question during the webinar, please type it on the question box in your webinar panel, and we'll go through them during the session. If you have any technical issue, please also type it in the question box, and I will try my best to sort that out for you. And that's all from me. Matt, you can get started.
Thanks, Ollie, and welcome everyone to this today's webinar on Introduction to SharePoint, which is a great product by Microsoft that a lot of not-for-profits that we're working with are starting to enjoy the benefits of. So I'm hoping that today will give you a sense of whether it's right for your organisation. So, as many of you would know, InfoExchange are a not-for-profit, and we work with only other not-for-profits to help them improve their use of technology. So we do that in a range of ways, but one of the ways we do that is by helping organisations move to Office 365, and that includes SharePoint. So we do that with organisations of all sizes. So even on the screen there, you can see there's some that are large national and international organisations with thousands of staff. Some are small organisations with just a handful of staff and mainly volunteer-led. So what the challenge is finding solutions that are right for each type of organisation and to suit the way each organisation works. So we use our knowledge of the sector and our background from 25 years in the sector to come up with those solutions and make sure we're giving you both cost-effective and efficient solutions that work for each type of organisation. And SharePoint's a great example where it's used differently by lots of different organisations, and for some organisations we actually say SharePoint's not suitable, and maybe some other options are a better place to serve their needs. So today I'm going to help you understand where SharePoint works and where SharePoint has some challenges, and if you are looking at implementing SharePoint, what are the things that you need to think about. So the first point to work through is, so each of those points there we're going to go through today, and hopefully by the end of today you will have a good understanding of whether SharePoint is right for you. And as Ollie said, we're going to break about halfway through, and we're going to have some time at the end for questions. But I know SharePoint is a big and very flexible tool, but it does a lot of different things. So I'm sure some of you will have questions that won't get answered today, and happy to take those offline via email. All right, the first and most important thing to think about is today we're mainly talking about SharePoint Online. So I'm not sure if any of you have had experience with SharePoint Server. If you're like me, I used to run a SharePoint server environment where I used to have servers both in an office or in a data center, and used to have a SQL server and a SharePoint server and a web server to run a SharePoint environment. Now, it's just part of Office 365 suite, and you actually get it free as part of your Office 365 E1 licenses. So hopefully most of you know by now that most not-for-profits are eligible to get an unlimited number of E1 licenses, and that's one of the key drivers for most not-for-profits saying, okay, let's explore at least what SharePoint can do, because it's a free tool and it's part of this great suite of tools that includes my emails and my calendar and all these other things that are suitable for each organisation. And as you can see there are a lot of different applications as part of the Office 365 suite. And you don't have to use them all is the most important thing to remember. And most organisations that we work with wouldn't use all of those. And the challenge also is to keep up with all the new ones. To be honest, I took this screenshot this morning because it was only this week that Teams started appearing in all of our Office 365 tenants. So we'll talk about each application soon, but one of the things to remember is Office 365 is an online product, and it's constantly changing and growing as Microsoft deploy or upgrade or change things. So it's a bit of a change from the old environment where you used to build a server and then upgrade it every 3 years. You find that there's upgrades almost on a weekly basis. But there is a roadmap, and you can keep an eye on things that are coming in the roadmap. So some of the things that have been recently upgraded or in the process of being upgraded, the sync tool just recently got upgraded and is quite improved from the old one. And the document library experience has recently been upgraded. So those of you already on it will have noticed that. There's a whole new suite of mobile apps. So my mobile app for my iPhone is new in the last month, and it actually is quite an improvement. The groups, I don't know if many of you know about Office 365 groups, which we'll touch on a bit later. It's now integrated quite well with SharePoint sites. So it's a complementary application that sits alongside SharePoint or underneath SharePoint, and it's getting quite integrated with SharePoint. So that's another key thing to look out for. The sync tool on Macs, so we've got a few people in our organisation and our clients who use Macs, and recently the OneDrive tool has just been released so that it synchronises SharePoint files on a Mac. You know, that's actually working well. Teams, I just mentioned in the last slide, is a new tool that Office 365 has launched for discussion-based sort of chats. Flow for workflow, and Power Apps and Forms. So these are just a few things that have been released recently or in the process of being released. So I would encourage all of you to have a click on that link once you get all these slides and go and see what's coming out, and if there's things that interest you in terms of things that maybe SharePoint doesn't do right now that maybe it will do in the future. So just to summarise, so SharePoint Online, I won't read that word for word, but it's basically a cloud-based system that Microsoft hosts for you. They look after it for you. You don't need any servers. All you need is a web browser, and it enables you to access SharePoint Online, which you can use for documents and information shared across your organisation. And at the moment, as it says there, it's based on SharePoint Server 2016. And when they're ready to upgrade, Microsoft will upgrade that. So some of the ways that not-for-profits are using SharePoint, I've popped on this slide. So look, it's quite a flexible and diverse tool, and it can be used differently for different types of organisations. And as I mentioned before, you don't have to use all of these. Some organisations purely just use this for a document sort of file server replacement, whereas others actually use it more for a project management tool and a collaboration tool. Others are using it for more partner portals or board portals, whereas others are using it as more a knowledge base or intranet for their staff communication. So it is cloud-based, it is hosted in Australia, and it does have good security and permissions. So you can choose what you share and who you share that with across the organisation. So when you're assessing the suitability of SharePoint for your organisation, I would encourage you to have a look at this and sort of try and identify which of these are of interest to you and which maybe you've got other solutions for, and that's okay. So we'll work through each of these throughout today's webinar. So the key things that SharePoint does that I'm assuming most of you have heard of, or that's the reason you're in this webinar today, is an intranet is the main one. Particularly larger organisations like to have a home page, an internal hub of information where their staff can log on. Some staff, that's their first thing they go to every morning to find what's new in the organisation and then navigate away to certain pieces of information. So that's what's traditionally known as an intranet. The next area there is more a team or project-based site that isn't necessarily for all staff, but it's for a specific purpose or a specific part of the organisation that you can use to manage either a task or documents or calendars or information and collaboration. The third one there, which some organisations are starting to really enjoy the benefits of, is you can just do some basic things like forms, storing data in lists, and using internal processes. So I'll touch on later things like a new user request form, or I've done incident reporting forms or maintenance requests, or those type of things you can actually just do in a custom SharePoint list. So we'll touch on that again later. But I'm assuming what most of you are interested in, and what I get asked a lot is, can I replace my file server, and can I store documents on this that mean I don't need to store them on my desktop or on my server or somewhere else or on Dropbox? So yes, it can do that. It's not suitable for everyone, but we'll talk through the pros and cons of that. But they're the four key things that SharePoint does and does well. But as I said, it's a very flexible tool and can do lots of different things on top of that or as part of those four things. So talking first through an intranet, as you can see there, it is reasonably customizable in terms of look and feel and design. So you can change colors, you can change layouts, you can change structures, and in many cases you can treat it a little bit like a website. So it's like a website for your organisation, and you can lay out the content basically however you want. Now, typically we encourage people to just try and do as much as they can using the out-of-the-box functionality, but just be aware you can actually develop on top of on SharePoint, so you can actually get a SharePoint developer to make it look however you want, and you can get third-party web parts that you can put in to do additional things over and above the out-of-the-box. But really, for most not-for-profits, the out-of-the-box solution does most of what people want. So I would really encourage you to start there and do as much as you can with that before really heading down that development path. So one of the key things that I talked about that a lot of organisations are using SharePoint for is that information sharing. So it's setting up a page like this, which is a resource hub where staff go to say, okay, I want to get the latest policies and procedures, or I want to get some templates, or I want to learn about our suppliers, or those sort of things. So it's really just having that intranet or that wiki or that knowledge base where staff can go to get information. Now, what's on the page there is pretty static information, but you can also have more dynamic things like news, CEO blogs, and things that change very, very regularly. So it's, again, giving you that customizable look and feel that allows you to just put your own images in and put your own text in and lay it out the way you want that suits your organisation, and come up with your own categories for information and set it up however you want. We talked a little bit before about collaboration. So it's becoming more and more popular and really a way of working now, where no longer do we want to send around documents. I'll email around version 1 and then 20 different people will email me back version 2 to 18, and then I'll have to make all those edits and then email it back around to everyone and get some final feedback, and then you've got the document stored in 20 different places. It's really just having that central spot where everyone can edit the document in the one spot, and we can have discussion about it in that same spot, or we can have some tasks about it to say, okay, everyone needs their feedback by this date, and it's tasks that goes in my Outlook tasks. So it's really having that collaboration area where I can have all that information, have all my documents, but as well as sharing it with people like boards, partners, and staff across the organisation. So it's really just giving you a place where you can work together with your colleagues. And what we're finding is having a free tool to do that, that's quite flexible. So you can actually do it on a project basis or do it on a team basis as well. So some examples of that. So up the top, we've got a board subsite. So having your meeting minutes, agendas, action lists, risk registers, calendars, all those sort of things that a board needs is a good example of being able to share and collaborate. So instead of all your IP and all the information for your organisation living in different board members' Gmail accounts, you've actually got it sitting in one site where you can actually track, and you can track a discussion on a budget, and a year later you can go back to that discussion board and say, oh yeah, that's why they made that decision about the budget. And likewise, that second screenshot there about the tasks. So you can have these task lists where you can track, you can have timelines, you can have allocate tasks where people get emailed and notified, and you can have discussions about those tasks as well. So they've got that newsfeed capability where you can post things and people can reply. So it's a reasonably flexible tool that really just enables you to collaborate across your organisation. All right, the other thing we touched on before was administration. So this is a very flexible area where essentially you have a blank canvas where you could build any sort of mini database or list or form that you want within your SharePoint environment. So basically you come up with the questions that you want and then you input that into a SharePoint list, and then when staff want to fill out a form, they just click on a link online from any web browser and then input information. And now that information lives in your SharePoint list on a permanent basis. So we've used that on a range of things, but the most common one, common few, is the new starter form. So we fill out a form to say, hey, I've got a new person starting. Can we get him a business card? Can we get him a uniform? Can we get him a computer? Can we get him a desk? Can we get him a whatever it may be? And these are things that we fill out. And then when the person clicks submit, then different people get notified to say, hey, the person who's in charge of the business cards, the marketing department, can you go off and put that order in? And likewise, the IT department gets a notification. So it's a really flexible tool, and it takes some learning to be able to do that, the complex ones of these, but it does give you that ability. Now, it's not an ideal, IT logging system, or it's not a perfect OH&S system, or it's not a HR system, but it can fill some of those gaps where you don't have systems for, and you're just wanting to collect some information internally. So I would encourage you to explore this and the suitability in your organisation. So here are some examples of that. So that's the example form, and they're the sample boxes that you would tick, and the database that lives in. So as I said, a reasonably simple way to do a basic form that keeps the information online, and it saves you having to fill out paper and scanning it and transposing that into an Excel document, or doing all the manual work. So it's really about efficiency and storing that data. All right, as I said, document management is one of the most popular things that people like to use SharePoint for. So look, often the first question I get is, can I replace my file server? The short answer to that is maybe. In some organizations, particularly small, not very complex document requirements, yes, we have done replace file servers, and many organizations use SharePoint for 100% of their document management needs. So I use SharePoint for all of my document management needs. However, there are other organizations where, based on a range of factors that we'll touch on again later, we say, actually, I think you need a file server, or actually, I think you need a range of systems to store that information. So that's a really tricky decision that needs broader thinking around what else a file server will do and what your real needs are for document management. The other thing that it can do, and which I use on a regular basis, is offline files. So we talked about the synchronization tool, and that allows you to synchronize SharePoint libraries to your local PC. So right now, I've got this PowerPoint presentation synced on my local PC. So if I picked my laptop up and went on a plane tonight, then I would still be able to edit this document, and the changes would, I would make the changes while on the plane offline, and then when I log back on, it would synchronize again, and then all my colleagues would be able to see it back tonight. So it has that offline functionality to give you redundancy and a bit of flexibility. It also has the ability to work together. So when you're online, you can actually work on a document at the same time. So we've had a group of 5 of us work on a document at once, and be able to see what each other are doing in the document and all work on separate sections in the document. So that saves that whole, I'll do my bit and send it to you, you do your bit, send it back to me, those sort of editing issues that many people have had in the past. The other thing that it does is version history, which means you can see in any time when people have made changes, and you can always revert back if you need to. So that's a really powerful tool that manages some of that risk that people are often worried about of losing versions if people edit things. So that's a really cool feature. Permissions, so you can set permissions by site, by folder, by document. Not that we normally recommend it by document, but it is flexible and it allows you to do manage who sees each bit of information. It does store all file types. You can store image, set up an image gallery. You can categorize things by metadata and do workflows as well. So this is how the versioning works, for example. So if you just go to, you right-click on a document and you see version history, it basically shows you all the old versions. So I can see those 2 different versions there, and I can revert back to the first one if I wanted to from the version 1 there. So if I didn't like the change that was made on version 2, I just go back and restore. The co-authoring, as you can see there's a sample of a document where if you're in Word, every time you click save, it refreshes and you can actually see where other people are. You can see a little green button there that shows the person's name. It's actually even better if you do it in Word Online because it's more live and you can see as people type. It's a really cool feature. And again, it's just facilitating that collaboration on a document. So particularly things like editing new policies or, you know, working on a project document, it really gives you that flexibility to be able to work with people from across the organisation. So I have staff across the country and we can work on documents together without having to email things back and forth. All right, we touched on this before, but so this is an example of what the sync tool looks like. So you can see the bottom right there. You can see that's a local copy in your Windows Explorer. And it just looks like a file server or it looks like your My Documents. But it is, you see all the green ticks there. It actually looks like a copy. It is a copy of all your documents that are stored up online. And it's constantly syncing using a sync tool. Now there's a little warning here, and we'll touch on it again later, but you do need to manage that synchronization. So if for any reason the sync breaks, so if you get a red cross on one of these folders, you then need to go in and manage it. So if you don't manage it, that's when you can come across issues. But the new sync tool, which has been upgraded recently, is better at doing that. So we'll touch on that again later. All right, so I'm going to pause now for questions. Ollie, before we go into any more detail, any questions so far? And obviously I'll give a chance at the end as well.
Thanks, Matt. Well, it's all pretty clear at the moment because we've got no questions.
Oh, perfect. And I'm going to keep going anyway. So definitely feel free to type it into the webinar box, and I'll try and save some time at the end. So hopefully that means you're all understanding all these intricacies of SharePoint, and hopefully it means you're thinking, yeah, this is suitable for my organization. One of the most common
Sorry, Matt, just to say that we've got a few people saying that, yes, it's all pretty clear and straightforward. So, yeah, please keep going, Matt.
Good, no worries. So one of the most common questions I get is the difference between OneDrive and SharePoint, which are both document management tools as part of the Office 365 suite. So both tools do similar things, which is part of the confusion. But typically how we recommend it is we treat OneDrive as a user's personal storage spot for their own information. So, for example, I use my OneDrive as just my working documents that I don't need to share with anyone, or even in some case my private documents about my own professional development or my own leave forms or those type of things that don't need to be shared and aren't that important to the organization. So if I have a leave info exchange and they choose to delete my account, essentially they'll delete everything in my OneDrive. And in my case, that's okay because I don't store anything there that is critical to the organization. If I want to share something with my team, or it's an important document or a policy or procedure, I actually share that in my SharePoint online team site. So that means the minute I store it there, it's shared by the whole organization or whoever's got permission to that site, and they can all edit that document. So that's typically how I decide whether I store things in OneDrive or whether I store things in SharePoint. Now, they can both be stored synced to my local PC, and in my case, I have them both synced to my local PC. So I can access either of them offline. And they both give me a lot of storage. So I have a terabyte of information that I can store in OneDrive if I wanted to. Now, to be honest, I don't think I will ever fill that up, and most of our clients, if not all, will never fill that up either. And the same with SharePoint. You get a terabyte per site, per sort of organization, and then 500 meg per license. And to be honest, they're changing that regularly anyway. So I think they're looking at upping that again. So, and if you've got 1,000 staff, that's 1,000 times 500 meg. So you can have a lot of storage in SharePoint. So what we're saying is they're two quite different document management systems that can do similar things. So to be honest, you can share documents from OneDrive and you can set up SharePoint so only you have permission, but typically we don't recommend that. Typically we say have a clear delineation between the two and make sure your staff are clear about what they store where. All right, now this is a key slide. Now this is the key difference between us and someone, no offense to Microsoft or a Microsoft salesman. Because to be honest, we only implement solutions that we can support and that we believe in. And while we love SharePoint and we do implement SharePoint a lot of the time, it's not suitable for every organization. Some organizations are very embedded in using a file server, and some their staff are not ready to change from using a file server, and their requirements mean they need a local server. So if those organizations came to me and said, can you implement SharePoint? Typically I would really hesitate and have some good questioning around, do you really need it? Do you really want it? because if you implement it in those scenarios, what we find is they fail, and then people blame the tool and say, oh, SharePoint's hopeless, but it's actually that it's not suitable for that organization. So these are the couple of things that you have to manage. So the sync tool has been known to have errors if you don't manage it. So if you've got lots of documents being edited by lots of different people at the same time, and while co-authoring works, if you have poor internet connectivity, it can cause errors, and those errors need to be managed. So if the sync tool doesn't know which one's the right version, in some cases the user will have to tell it. And if that user doesn't go in and tell it, then it can cause synchronization errors between different versions on different people's PCs. So it's just something you need to manage. And if it's managed, it can work. And many organizations are working with it fine. One of the key, number 4 there, one of the key things that hurts some organizations is there's a 5,000 file limit for each library. So for those organizations with 20,000 files, it means you've actually got to break your files up into different areas and different libraries. So you can't just pick up at whatever's on your file server and dump it in one SharePoint library and expect it to work. So that's, again, where some people get stuck if they just try and do it themselves and dump it on. So that can break permissions and it can break the synchronization. So that's something to be aware of. Another thing that catches out organizations is if people have file names longer than 250 characters, and this is very common if you're an organization that has long, deep folders. So if you've got 10 layers of folders, and each folder is quite long, then that goes into the file name. So if you've got 10 folders deep and then a file name with 50 characters, it can, again, break the sync tool and cause issues. So that's another thing that essentially needs to be cleaned up before you move to SharePoint. The other thing is the storage. So again, if you've got massive files or a lot of videos or images, then potentially you need to look at other solutions for some of those things. So again, I wouldn't automatically just dump all your videos and large files on SharePoint and keep that storage in mind. Now, a terabyte is a lot, so most organizations are okay, but it is something you need to keep an eye out for. Now, SharePoint is I'll say a reasonably intuitive tool, but it does take some knowledge for someone to be able to edit it. You can't, like any content management system, like any website tool or most systems, you can't just assume that you're going to know exactly how to do everything that you want to do. So it does take a bit of training and a bit of thought before you can just sort of set it up. And that's both for the setup and for the management on an ongoing basis. The migration can be time-consuming and not simple. So as I said, you can't just pick everything up on a file server and go copy-paste. It can be a more complex process, and to be honest, that's usually what takes the most amount of time when we work with organisations to migrate them to SharePoint, is to work out how to migrate the content in the most efficient way and the safest way. And depending on how complex your permissions are, you do need to manage that carefully. So usually we say try and keep the permissions as open as possible and make sure that when you set permissions, it's for a reason. So they're just a few of the limitations and challenges that we see when we're implementing SharePoint for organizations. So in some cases, we actually tell people, actually what you're trying to achieve, SharePoint's not the best tool for you. So in many cases, people come to us and say, oh, okay, I want to have just a discussion with across my teams. And if that's all they need, then probably SharePoint's not the best solution. Probably something like Yammer or Teams, which are also just free as part of the Office 365 suite, may be suitable. Office 365 Groups is another one that's been released over the last 6 months that's starting to fill a gap for particularly smaller organisations or just teams or projects where you're just needing one document library and a calendar and a notebook and just some basic collaboration. If that's all you need, then potentially Office 365 groups can sort of be a solution for you. And that's now getting integrated with SharePoint as well. So that's a consideration. People often ask us about, oh, I want somewhere where I can book rooms or, you know, put a calendar to share my meetings with my colleagues. And usually we say, actually, that's part of Exchange. That's part of your email, where you can just send a calendar invite to each other or share calendars or book rooms as a shared resource. So in many cases, we say, actually, that's better done on Exchange. So this is the process we normally go through with other organisations, where we sort of determine their requirements first and then try and match the tool to what they need. Business intelligence reporting is Power BI. Now, again, Power BI can integrate well with SharePoint, but it's starting to do that whole dashboarding thing a little bit better. We've already talked about OneDrive for individual documents. Online forms, there's a new tool called Power Apps that's starting to do that. But as I said earlier, some of those things, you use starter forms and those sort of things are still good to be done in SharePoint. Now, project management can be done in a SharePoint project site, or if you're using a more agile sort of project management methodology, something like Office 365 Planner can actually work as well. So it's, again, a new tool. It's part of Office 365 groups as well. And it's a good alternative if it's a more casual style project. Delve is getting quite good at like an org chart sort of way, a place for you to go to find information about people in your organisation. So instead of having the old-fashioned org chart on a PDF document, Delve is a dynamic spot that is trying to fill that gap. Office 365 videos. So you actually get a video portal. So you don't need to just dump videos as part of your document library. You can store them in a separate, it's like a YouTube style platform for your internal. Instant messaging and video conferencing, you actually have Skype for Business for that. And if you're wanting local storage for things like large files and videos, then maybe you do need a NAS, which is network attached storage, or a server locally. All right, so as I said, really the first thing to ask yourself is, why do you need or want SharePoint? Really, it comes back to your requirements. And then is an intranet the best tool to solve your problem? Often when we sort of flesh this question out, people actually end up saying, well, actually, no, I need a client management system or a case management system. Oh, no, I need a CRM, or, oh, no, we can do that on our website. Or, you know, so there are lots of different ways for organisations to achieve goals. It's more just working out, is this really the right solution for you? And I'm assuming that's why you're here today, so hopefully this was helping. And are you ready to change? So as I said before, some people want to get rid of a server because they want to save costs, but they're not ready culturally to change the way they work and communicate across their organisation. So that's the first question that we usually ask. And are staff and management supportive of the idea? So if you can't justify this to management of changing the way you work, and almost more importantly to your staff, then you know it's destined for failure, these type of projects. So before you roll this out, or before you even sort of set up a trial or a demo, you really need to work out what's the purpose of it, and where does it sit with all my other information in my systems. So what information do I put in SharePoint? What information do I store on my server? What information do I put on my client management system? Those type of things. So it's not necessarily going to do everything for everyone. So the important thing is to define what it will do. So to help you determine your requirements, these are some of the questions we like to ask. So who will be using it? So is it staff or volunteers? Or is it just your management? Or is it all your staff, including your casuals? Is it your board? Is it your office staff, or is it your staff out and about? So why do they access it? Often people set up intranets and then they find out that their staff actually never log in. And because they don't have a key reason for accessing it, they've got everything they need in another system, or maybe it's still paper-based, I don't know. But really, for this to be successful, they need a reason to log in and access it. And where else do they access information? So if they're already logging into a client management system, a HR system, a website, a server, all these other locations, then why do they need to come into an intranet as well? The other key ones are when they'll be logging in and what device they'll be using. So if you're in a childcare environment, for example, well, you know, it's not something you're going to do during your shift because you're busy working with the kids. So it's relying on people using a shared computer in the staff room or logging on their home computer. So how you set it up is different if they're going to use different devices, or maybe they're using the mobile app on an iPad, or maybe they're just checking their emails on their phone and that's all they need it for. So considering all of these things will help how you design your solution. And what are they looking for? Is it something they're going to be collaboratively editing and co-authoring? Do they need Word and Excel on their device? Or is it just a policy that they're just going to download once and then never go there again? One of the most important things is who's managing the content. So is it something that the management are going to manage to make sure everything on there is up to date? Who's going to put news up? Are you going to have a CEO blog? And if so, how often is your CEO going to write a blog? And if you're expecting your CEO to write a blog, are they comfortable using it, and do they have the motivation for them to do it every week? So really, the most important thing is, what does success look like? So when you're building a business case for justifying an intranet, you need to say, okay, my idea is that we're going to have a spot where all staff log on before they start every shift. They're logging onto this homepage, they're accessing the news, they're seeing what's happening around the organisation, they're learning what new policies we have, they're sharing news about their day, they're seeing who's on shift, they're accessing their timesheets, all those sort of things. So just having a clear vision of what success looks like and how your staff are going to use it is really the first step to a successful intranet. All right, so once you've decided, let's assume that you're all going at this point, yes, great, thanks Matt, we love SharePoint, we want to do it. Then the question is, how are you going to do it? So do you have someone, and someone with the time, internally to implement SharePoint? So again, it's a reasonably intuitive Microsoft system, but it's not necessarily something you can do by yourself straight away. And we've seen that with many people have tried and failed. Or do you need an external partner? So do you need someone to come in and give you some advice, or someone to come in and do everything for you? And most importantly, who's going to manage this on an ongoing basis? So I know file servers, for example, often go unmanaged, but an intranet is something that you need to manage content, and you need to review the content and migrate the content as part of the implementation. And what about our staff who are going to use this, who are going to start co-authoring and going to start using collaboration spaces and going to start managing projects through SharePoint sites? Who's going to train them how to do it? And how are we going to manage the change? So these are all questions that you need to answer essentially before you confirm that you're implementing SharePoint. So here are some examples of stages. So I think the first step is you don't have to do it all at once, and there are a range of steps involved in implementing. And while there's no one size fits all for everyone, this is an example of some stages. So again, you can use this to sort of scope out your plan for implementing SharePoint. So first step is find a partner if you need one, and or an internal champion. So even if you're using a partner, you still need someone internally to drive this. Or if it's a staff member that has some, is good tech savvy, got some web skills, maybe they're going to do a lot of it first, and maybe they're going to get skilled up and access resources like this or our do-it-yourself workshops. So the first stage is business case and approval. And the business case is obviously for management and board if you need any investment, but generally business cases are also for the users to justify why we're doing this. As we said on a previous slide, what are the requirements? What are the use cases? Review and scoping. So this is where you understand what you need and understand where SharePoint fits in your organization. So what don't you store in SharePoint? Maybe you're saying, okay, anything to do with the client sits on the client management system, but anything else that's currently on a file server, that moves to SharePoint. So that's that scoping exercise. And then it's looking at, okay, what content do we have and what do we want to bring across and what do we want to archive or not bring across? So doing that planning process. And then looking at how do I set up SharePoint? What layout am I going to have? What are my pages going to look like, and how many sites am I going to have? What am I going to call them? And what permissions? So who's going to access what site? And then stage 6 there is when you actually build it. So the most common issue that we see is often people just skip the first 5 stages and they just go and set up a site and start dumping content on there. And that's usually the most common way people fail with SharePoint, is they skip that whole reason for doing it and the design process and planning the migration. All right, and then you need to train your administrators and your champions. You need to test it and pilot it. Then you migrate your content. Then you launch it. And then you have to manage it on an ongoing basis and run that training. So that's just an example of 10 steps that many organizations should take to roll out a SharePoint environment. So one of the keys is, what will the information architecture look like? So here's an example of what a site structure could be. And as you see, it's different layers, and you've got sites, and you've got sub-sites, and then you've got libraries under that. So this has all got to be based on your organizational structure. And different projects. Again, this will come out of your requirements to say, yes, we need an area for our corporate services to work together on a new finance system. We need a brand refresh project where people are going to work together and store documents and tasks. As we touched on before, the governance and that decision-making around permission and access is important as well. So again, this is something people often forget, but you need some way to decide who can access what documents and what permissions you're going to have. So should anything be restricted? Now, again, some people can get a bit overzealous with this and try and lock down everything, and it just makes it really complicated. So what we try and do is say, keep it as high level as possible. If there's no reason to lock things down, and in many cases, most things aren't locked down now on your file server, so why do you need to lock them down? But yes, maybe you need a separate area for your board, or maybe your HR department needs a separate area, but apart from that, generally, policies, procedures are generally open to everyone. And for each area, you need a clear responsibility of who owns that area. So for the board site, you need a person, either on your board or your executive assistant maybe, that owns that board site and make sure the content's up to date. So you need to consider that administrative overhead and make sure you're not sort of rolling that out without having someone to support it. And who will manage the permissions? So if someone asks you, hey, can I get access to the board site? Who's going to say yes or no, and who's going to, what are they going to reference when they say, oh, yes, you're allowed, or no, you're not allowed? All right. one of the key things, we've touched on this already, but for any new site, change management is critical. So we see this a lot where people just try and go, okay, we're using SharePoint now, here it is, log on, off you go. And again, it's destined for failure. So really, the change management starts with building the business case and finding champions, and then setting up a pilot group where you can do some testing. And some of the ways it's worked best is where you've created some hype. We've had competitions to create a name. We've done lunchtime training sessions. We've had posters around offices, really getting excited about this new tool, this new thing that's going to be core to your organisation in the coming years. So make sure you give it the justice it deserves. Training, demo sessions. Make sure you've got a help area where users can get documentation if they need to. In some cases, stage the approach. Now, so maybe some teams or projects need it urgent, or you should test it with them before you just roll it out to the rest of the organisation. And make the communication about the intranet just core to any staff meetings or any other internal communications that you do. So, and it's not just about the launch, it's just on a regular basis. If things change or if you want to get some feedback, make sure that's on a regular basis. All right, so just summing up, I'm making sure that we leave a few minutes for questions. So make sure you type them in now and then we'll pause. But before that, I just wanted to give some top tips. So just to summarise the last 55 minutes, top tips for SharePoint is the first step is to explain the benefits to staff and support them to make the change. So we found that local champion model are the best ways to help roll this out, and both initially and on an ongoing basis. So they don't need to be SharePoint gurus, they don't need to be tech IT managers, just someone locally that staff can go to say, hey, what's with this SharePoint thing? How do I use it? And then that person can either refer them to resources or training or help them themselves if they can. Point two, the top tip is don't assume, don't try and pretend that SharePoint is a file server. I've had a few people do this and it's, again, destined for failure, where they just want staff to pretend and use the OneDrive sync tool and use the internet, the file explorer on their desktops for all their documents. It's not a file server and it is different. So get staff to start getting used to using a web browser, and yeah, use OneDrive if they need some offline copies, but acknowledge that they understand what the sync tool is doing and that the primary source of truth is the online version. So that's a key mistake some people make. The portals are really good for project management or sharing documents, and boards are really getting some value out of those sort of online portals, because typically they're people that don't even have email accounts or don't have access to the file server. So having an area where they can share minutes and agendas and those sort of things helps bring them into the organisation. I would encourage you to explore those lists for those basic admin and collecting information. It's really some, a cool tool to fill some gaps between systems. Consider metadata for some libraries, not all, but things like policies. Instead of using folders, look at tagging to say, okay, that's a document type is a policy or tag per department. So it allows you to sort and filter. I didn't go into metadata too much today because we had too much else to cover, but I would explore that or talk to your partner or your SharePoint person about metadata and how you could use that instead of using the old folder system. So really make sure you've got someone that can or does know how to use SharePoint before you make the transition. So look at that data migration. Look, obviously you can do some testing and playing, but we've seen several organisations sort of try and fail if they're without a real plan and without that support. So I would encourage you to do that. But just like you would go to a web developer in many cases when you're developing a website. So consider actually changing your practices. So don't assume that everything you're doing on the file server, you should just bring across. So it's usually a good opportunity to say, actually, how do we name these? If these, long names or the 10 layers of folders is actually ridiculous. Why are we doing it that way? Let's look at changing that before we bring it over to SharePoint. Or why don't we archive that? Or why do we actually need to keep these documents? Or, hey, these should be broken down into permission areas because most people shouldn't have access to that. So just have a look at that, consider that bigger project. Look at local storage. So in many cases, we actually say large files, marketing, Adobe InDesign files or video editing or access databases or those sort of things. They probably shouldn't just automatically be copied over to SharePoint, and in many cases are better placed on the local storage. So I'd consider that as well. And yeah, look at some of those other applications like Yammer, OneDrive, Groups, Planner, etc., or Client Management System to make sure that's more suitable. And just making sure that before you implement something, that there's a clear reason for you to do it for your staff and organisation. All right. So we do have both Connecting Up and Info Exchange have come up with a few things to help organisations. So there's a thing called the readiness assessment, which is just a $100 thing that you buy from Connecting Up, which basically gets you some time with one of our consultants to do a report for you on your current environment and whether you're ready to move to Office 365. Now that covers email, SharePoint, Skype for Business, anything, groups. So we basically do an assessment and say, yep, you're ready, and this is how you would go about it, and here's a rough cost estimate of if you got someone to help you, here's how you would do it. So I would encourage you to look at that. DIY workshops, so if you're sort of keen to do it yourself and you've got someone in-house, these DIY workshops are good. They're basically a series of 3 webinars, and to be honest, we've got one coming up very soon. So if you're interested, get in touch with me straight away, because I think this one's starting next week for SharePoint. So again, it's $300. You register with Connecting Up, and we can help you migrate to Office 365 and either email or SharePoint for that process. We've also got some other webinars, and we also do help people with implementations in SharePoint if you need to. And if you're ready to go, there's the Microsoft website where you can actually set up a free trial. So my email address is there and my phone number, so feel free to contact me directly. And happy to open it up for questions and discussion, Ollie.
Thank you, Matt. Well, it looks really like you've answered most questions so far, because we've got no questions at the moment. But I know that a couple of questions that come up quite regularly when we do that webinar is about admin rights and user access in SharePoint. Like, how can you set folders up so only certain people can access certain files? And what happens when someone leaves the organization? What happens to the data that they have synced on their personal computer and all that security side of things? Are you able to develop a little bit on that?
Sure. So I suppose one of the answers to that is when you set up security and permissions, we typically recommend that you set it up per area. So essentially, you would set up particular areas like the board or HR, or each project can have its own permissions, and then based on that, people store the information there and access it when they have permission. But if someone doesn't have permission to that area, then you lose access. So you can manage permissions at either a folder level or a document library level or a document level, but typically we try and say to manage the permissions at the highest level possible. so that it's easier for you to manage. And they're in broad groups, and you can manage it through your Active Directory on your server, or you can manage it through Office 365 groups as well. So, and then as soon as someone leaves the organization and you disable their password, they can't access that site anymore. So, because you need your Office 365 account to log into that site. So I hope that answered the question, Ollie. But yeah, obviously anyone can email me directly if they've got any other questions.
Thank you, Matt. Still no questions. So if you've got any, please write them in a question box. I've got another that comes up actually two others that come up quite regularly. One's about how different is Skype for business compared to normal, like the regular Skype?
Yeah, so Skype for Business is a tool that you get as part of Office. So when you buy 2016 from Connecting Up, you get Skype for Business as part of it. It is similar to Skype, but different. So Skype for Business is predominantly an internal tool for your organization. So by default, you can instant message and video and share screens with your organization, but you also can connect with people externally, and you can add on the ability to integrate sort of phone systems and dialing numbers. Particularly Microsoft are working on that in the future. So that's a key difference, whereas Skype is actually a separate account that you'll need to go and register, and it's more a personal one-on-one thing, whereas Skype for Business is more an organizational-wide communication tool.
Thank you, Matt. And the other question that comes up quite often is just how fast an internet do you need to have to be able to use SharePoint?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, that one. It really depends on the number of staff and the number of documents that you're accessing. So there is no right or wrong. You know, we've got some organisations that are using ADSL. You know, let's say they've got under 10 staff and they've got sort of smallish sites and smallish amount of information on SharePoint, and they're using SharePoint's fine. And we've got many other organisations who are just using it as an intranet. So all staff are doing is logging on and downloading a document every now and again. So again, ADSL and those sort of poorer connections are fine. Whereas if you're a larger organisation, let's say you've got 50 staff in your office and you're on ADSL and you're thinking of using SharePoint as your only file storage and you're wanting to store videos and large images, then I probably wouldn't recommend doing that on a really poor ADSL connection, because every time you save or try and access a document, you're actually saving it up on the internet. So you're uploading and downloading. So you do need to be careful, particularly those sort of mid and large size organisations or people with lots of documents or large documents.
Thank you, Matt. There are no more questions, so is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap things up?
No, and just really thank you everyone for today. I know an hour out of your day is, you know, a big effort for some of you. I know you're all busy, but I really do think that SharePoint is a good solution, and in some ways will be suitable for probably all of you. So feel free to contact me if you've got any other questions.
Thank you very much for presenting, Matt, and thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you've learned a lot from it, and it does sound like Matt answered to all of your questions pretty efficiently. Just to remind you, the recording of this session and the slides will be available on our website soon. If you have any questions that come to your mind later on or any feedback, please feel free to send that through to events@connectingup.org, and we'll answer those questions offline. Again, thank you for being with us. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.